Hey guys, welcome back to How to Roll Dice. I'm Josh, and today we're going to be doing a slightly modified review and walkthrough of this game right here, Root by Leader Games, or Letter Games. I'm not exactly sure how I'm supposed to pronounce L-E-D-E-R. Root is the 2018 Game of the Year that has players taking on the role of various woodland factions attempting to regain control of their homeland. The factions, however, are completely asymmetrical, meaning they all play in a very unique and different way from one another. You have the Marquis de Cat, who are attempting to sort of commercialize and industrialize the forest by producing sawmills that spit out wood, and workshops that craft items, and recruitment centers that add more warriors to the board. They play kind of like your standard war game style faction. But then you have the Erie Dynasty, who are the once noble sort of fallen bureaucracy government that used to rule the forest. They have a very powerful ability that can kind of turn on you very quickly. They have to follow this thing called the decree, where once you've decided to take an action, you have to continue to take that action every single turn going forward, adding one new action or more every turn, and if you ever can't take that action, everything falls apart. Then you have the Woodland Alliance. They're unique in that they don't start on the board at all. They're kind of the underground rebel overthrowing type coup group. They're trying to liberate the forest and get rid of these other two governments and have sympathizer colonies spread out throughout the various clearings, and they want to create random bases and militarize groups of the citizens that live throughout the woodland to fight back against the cats and the birds. And then you have the Vagabond. The Vagabond is literally an individual. He is one character. He is the Vagabond. You only have one little meeple guy. And you're going to roam around the forest, basically having your own little RPG adventure. You're going to explore, you're going to craft, you're going to trade with the other factions. You can create friendships, you can create hostilities, you can join in on the war, you can completely avoid the war. You're kind of just doing your own thing. You're going on your own little quests and you're exploring ruins. So in the sense that this is a fully asymmetrical game, as I just explained, I'm not going to be able to give a fully in-depth review or walkthrough of the rules, because I would have to teach you the base mechanics of the game, which are relatively complex, and then the mechanics of each of the factions, how they play and how to strategize with them, and then how they play against each other in the setting of the base mechanics. I basically have to teach you 5 games in one 30-minute video, and that's just not a thing I know how to do. I've actually tried to film this about 10 times already, and I've failed every time. So looking at the clock, I've got about 25 minutes left. Let's go into components on a faction-to-faction basis, but first we're going to start with the map, and first beyond that, we're going to start with one of my favorite things about the game, which is the art style. I'm going to have some things to nitpick and complain about throughout the course of this review, but I want to start with saying the art style and the art direction of this game is absolutely amazing. It's brilliant. It's beautiful, it's inviting, it's warm, it's cartoonish but mature at the same time. The way that it depicts the different woodland critters, you know, toting their swords and their shields and their pikes and dressed as friars with their hoods up, or knights, you know, clad in armor charging into battle to defend their clearings. It's just really great, and it immediately draws you into the game and it makes you want to play it. It's a good counterpoint to the rule books, plural, there's like 4 of them, and you're still going to have to look stuff up online because they're not really all that descriptive as far as how some of the rules should work. But yeah, absolutely love the art that is spread across this game, from the cards to the player boards to the tokens, the little wooden meeples, the map. It's all beautiful. So getting into the map as sort of our foundation for the setup here. It's a double-sided map. One side depicts the woodland in this lovely autumn scene. You've got the clearings highlighted in orange, red, and yellow trees to denote the different types of clearings. Bunny clearings are yellow, fox clearings are red, mouse clearings are orange. And then you have these nice little white pebble walkways that go between them. Those are the paths that you can take between clearings when you're moving, and these large green evergreen forest areas, as well as a river that flows through the middle of the map that's used in the expansion to the game, which adds the river folk. I'm never going to pick that up. I'll tell you that right now. The opposite side of the board is the winter side. The winter side does not denote any of the clearings as far as color goes. You actually have to use these randomizer tokens to determine where the different clearings are laid out, thus adding another layer of unbalanced to a pretty unbalanced game. I don't know why you'd ever take that option, but it's there if you want it. Touching on a few more things before we get into the individual factions, and I'll try to get through as much of it as I can in my remaining time. We have the shared deck. The shared deck has cards of 4 different suits, 3 of which match the clearings, so again, red fox, yellow bunny, orange mouse. And then the 4th faction, or the 4th suit, are blue bird cards, which are wild and can count as any of the other 3 suits. Those cards do things like allow players to craft items, which gains you additional victory points, to use special abilities to buff your faction, or to do things in combat like ambush your attacker before you get pummeled over the head. Those cards are going to be drawn and used in other unique ways based off of the faction that you're playing. For example, the Woodland Alliance can convert its hand into supporters, which can then be used to spread sympathy across the forest, which can convert into uprisings and outrage and all kinds of fun things. The Eerie Dynasty is going to be adding their cards to their decree, adding an ever-growing number of actions to their turn-to-turn functions that they must follow or else their government collapses into turmoil. The Marquis de Cat, for the most part, is just going to be using their cards as cards because they already have so much they can do. And the Vagabond is going to be trading their cards away because as players craft items from cards, they're essentially luring the Vagabond to come to them to trade them items, or to trade them cards for that item, because the Vagabond is the only player that can actually use items because they're playing an RPG. So finding a new pair of boots or a lovely short sword is actually useful when you're an individual explorer roaming around the forest. So we've got the map, we've got the shared deck, and we've got these 12-sided dice here. 12-sided dice, 2 of them, are denoted with 0s, 1s, 2s, and 3s. 3 of each, so you get 3 0s, 3 1s, 3 2s, and 3 3s. Those are used in battle, and that's, I believe, the only time you use them. And then you've got the rule books over here. I'll touch on those, but like I said, they're complex, they're laid out in an okay fashion. They each serve a purpose. There's one that walks you through 2 example turns of the game with 4 players. There's another one that gives you the basic mechanics of the game. There's a third one that gives you an advanced breakdown of the rules of the game. There's a 4th sheet that kind of just explains to you why there are 3 rule books and gives you an idea of what comes in the box and how to get started. And then there's Google and Board Game Geek, where you're going to look up most of the rules you actually need to know once you've started playing the game. So, getting into the actual factions, we'll start with the Marquis de Cat. And again, each of these factions has their own unique set of components I'm going to touch on here, as well as a little bit of how they play. The Marquis de Cat has these lovely orange cat warrior meeples. They also have cardboard tokens for their sawmills, their workshops, their recruitment centers, the wood that their sawmills produce, and their keep, which is their castle stronghold that only they have. They also have their VP tracker, which every faction has, that's going to go onto the board to track where you are on VP between 0 and 30. The first player to reach 30 wins the game, unless, of course, you've played the dominance card from the shared deck, which allows you to win the game with a completely different win condition by controlling 3 clearings of the same color simultaneously. And once you play that card, you can't win via VP, and you can't undo that option. So that's fun. We've had a couple players fall into that trap, and I'll explain why it's a trap if I have time. But so for the Marquis de Cat, for the most part, like I said, you're going to be expanding, you're going to be putting more warriors onto the board from recruitment centers, you're going to be using your workshops to craft items, and you're going to be using your sawmills to produce wood, which you use to build each of your 3 types of buildings. As you build buildings, you'll earn victory points, because that's primarily how the Marquis de Cat earns victory points. The other way that they can do that, because they have such a massive army of cats, they actually start with a cat on every single clearing on the board at the beginning of the game, other than 1. Because they have such an army of cats, they can do a lot of battling, and they can succeed in battle most of the time. When you destroy a token or a building from your opponent in battle, you'll also gain a victory point, so cats are relatively good at that. So I'm not going to get into any further detail on cats because we need to move along, but that's how cats work. You're going to start with a lot of warriors, you're going to get a lot more warriors, you're going to expand, you're going to build. As you build, you're going to get victory points. Moving on to the Eerie Dynasty. You start with 1 clearing that you control, and it's the clearing opposite the cat stronghold. The cat stronghold is going to be placed in 1 corner of the board. There's 1 clearing in each corner of the map. The cat's going to choose 1 to have their keep there. The Eerie start in the other corner, the opposite corner. They place 1 roost, which are their home bases. It's these blue cardboard tokens here. And that starts with 6 bird warriors in that corner to sort of begin your little army that you're going to be growing. You also have to choose a leader card from these 4 leaders. Each leader has a special ability and denotes where your 2 vizier cards start. Your vizier cards are these 2 blue bird cards here, and those are going to start in 2 of your 4 decree locations. Your decree, again, is how the Eerie function for the most part. So say, for example, you chose my favorite starting leader, the Builder. The Builder says you're going to start with your 2 viziers in recruit and move. So you would take your viziers, you would tuck them under the board so that they're sticking out from recruit and move, and you wouldn't have anything under battle and build. Those are the 4 things in your decree. The way your decree works is every turn, after going through a couple of starting steps, you're going to have to move through your decree from left to right. There might be more than one card tucked into a specific section. Say, for example, you have 2 cards in Recruit. You can resolve those 2 cards in either order, but you have to go from left to right, resolving your cards as you go. So Recruit, Move, Battle, Build. Getting into how those function, Recruit is you recruit a new warrior onto any location where you have a roost. A roost are your little base tokens. However, you can only recruit at a location based off of the suit of the card that you've tucked. So you start with your 2 viziers, which are blue, and blue is wild. So that means anywhere you have a roost. But say, for example, you had put a bunny card under there. The next time you recruit, or after you've recruited at any location, you also have to recruit in a bunny clearing where you have a roost. If you don't have a roost in a bunny clearing, or you're out of birds to place, something bad is going to happen. I'll touch on that in just a moment. Then you have Move. You move from a clearing that you control. There's a rule called Rule, which I really wish they could have gone with a better name, but Rule as in ruling a space. The player with the most stuff in a clearing rules that clearing. You combine the number of warriors you have with the number of tokens and buildings, and that is your sort of ruling score. You compare that to every other player who has any tokens or warriors in that clearing, and whoever has the most is the ruler rules that clearing. If there's a tie, nobody rules it unless you are the Eerie Dynasty, in which case you rule it, because that is one of the rules that the Eerie Dynasty has. So you place your leader, you place your starting viziers, and every turn you're going to go through your decree. The trick is you have to add at least 1 card, 2 cards if you want, to your decree every turn. So that list of things that you must do in a certain order at clearings of a certain type grows every turn. And there's even a rule that says of the 2 cards that you place, only one of them can be a blue bird card, which are wilds, which are the easiest to resolve because it gives you a little bit more freedom as to how you deal with it. So eventually you're going to run into the point where you can't perform the action listed in the decree, and what happens is your faction falls into turmoil. You lose a bunch of victory points, all the cards in your decree get thrown out, you pick a new leader, your old leader gets basically cast out, and you have to sort of start your government over. And you get reset a bunch of victory points. It's really hard to manage the decree beyond 6 or 7 turns because you just can't keep doing the same actions in the same place over and over. You just start to run out of that functionality. And it's like having to think turns ahead in chess. You can think a turn ahead. You can try to think 2 turns ahead. If you're really good, you can think 3 or 4 turns ahead. 7? That's like masterclass stuff. And that's where you get with the Eerie Dynasty very quickly. So that's them. Moving on to the Woodland Alliance. Like I said, they start with nothing on the board, and what they're going to do is they're going to be using cards from their hand to create supporters by placing them into the supporter pile. Supporting cards can be used to produce sympathy in clearings that aren't already sympathetic. A sympathetic clearing is used for your, similar to the cats, it's used for your crafting option. Cats have workshops, the Eerie Dynasty has their roosts. Woodland Alliance have the sympathy tokens in the clearings. Those sympathy tokens can eventually be converted into bases. Bases can be used to put warriors on the board. Warriors can be used to take actual military actions. So you're starting non-militant and you're building towards militant, but you build very quickly, and you've got a lot of passive abilities that make it easy for you to get ahead even though you started behind. For example, when you're attacked, instead of the attacker getting the higher dice and the defender getting the lower dice, which is normally how it works, after rolling, they get the higher dice as the defender, and the attacker gets the lower dice because of an ability called Guerrilla War. They also have some crazy benefits that have to do with if they have a sympathetic clearing and you move into that clearing, you have to give them a card from your hand matching that clearing's type or show that you don't have one, in which case they actually get to draw a card from the deck and add it to their supporter stack. Also, if you attack and remove a supporter token from a supporter clearing, you have to give them a card from your hand that matches the clearing, or they get to draw a card and put it into their supporter stack. So if you do anything against them, they get a benefit. If you fight them, they get a benefit. If you move towards them, they get a benefit. If you remove their sympathy, they get a benefit. They're actually, arguably throughout the number of games that I've played, they're the hardest to beat and the easiest to win as, and everybody that's disagreed with that has changed their mind once they've played as them. So that's the Woodland Alliance. Overthrow the government, sneak in and blow stuff up. Then we have the Vagabond. The Vagabond is probably the most complex just because he's really playing his own game. At the beginning of the game, you're going to choose one of 3 character cards. That's going to change your starting inventory as the Vagabond. You're also going to place random ruin items underneath the 4 ruin tokens that will be on the map, because throughout the course of the game, you can explore and discover those items at random, adding them to your inventory. You have all different types of stuff you can do as far as utilizing your items to go on mini quests from a deck of quest cards that only you can utilize, gaining you victory points or allowing you to draw extra cards. You can interact with the other factions by wandering into their clearings and trading them cards for items that they've crafted, thus gaining those items and adding them to your inventory, using them to take other actions. Pretty much all of your actions are based off the items that you have. You can craft your own items, you can explore and find items, you can trade for items. Trading for items also changes your relationship status with that faction. You can also choose to attack a faction either in a stealthy way or a not so stealthy way. If you do it in a stealthy way, then you get to remove their warriors from the board just sort of like secretly. If you do it in a standard stabbing kind of way, you actually move their friendship tracker down to hostile, and they're now an enemy for the rest of the game. You can even take certain actions that would normally change the victory condition for other players in the way that they have to control a certain number of clearings of a certain type to win the game. You can play that card, but because you don't actually get to control clearings, instead it allows you to permanently ally with another faction, and that's actually the only way to get them out of hostile once you've made them hostile. They become indifferent to you. But yeah, he's very much his own thing. He can move into forests. Nobody else can move into forests. They can only move between clearings using pathways. The Vagabond can hop in and out of forests. He can move freely through clearings that he doesn't control. Normally you have to rule a clearing to move from it or to it. Or I should say, when you move, you have to be moving from a clearing that you own or to a clearing that you own by the rule of rule. The Vagabond doesn't care. He can kind of just roam around the board. He doesn't have any HP like the rest of the warriors do. Each warrior has 1 hit point, and if they take that, they get knocked off the board, except for the cats, who can scurry back home to their keep, which is in the corner. It's their stronghold, like I mentioned. You have to discard a card to do that, but they could do that. The Vagabond can't get knocked off the board because you've only got the 1 model, so what do? Well, your stuff gets broken. People smash your sword, they smash your teapot, they break your hammer, they rip your bag, and then you have to spend some time hiding in the woods and repairing your things. So he works very differently. He's like you're playing your own minigame of D&D while everybody else is warring. So how am I doing on time? I have no idea. I'm going to try to see the computer over there. Really not sure. Let's get into a quick review of the game, and I apologize if it feels like I haven't gone into the rules at all, but honestly, there's no time to. Do I recommend the game? Maybe. I think the game is beautiful to look at. It's extremely unique. It's got a concept that I've never seen in any other game. I've seen games that are asymmetrical to some degree. I've never seen a game that's so asymmetrical that everybody is honestly playing their own game entirely. If you're playing the Woodland Alliance, you have nothing in common, strategically, rules-wise, at all, with any other faction. If you're playing the Vagabond, you don't even care what the other players are doing for the most part. If you're playing the Dynasty, you don't have any, there's nothing that you can do other than focus on your decree. That's the sole thing that you need to wrap your head around. And if you're playing as the Marquis de Cat, for the most part, you're playing the simplest version of the game, but you're trying to, at the same time, worry about what all the other players are doing because you need to control the board. You need to have stuff everywhere. You need to put buildings out there, and you just know that the Dynasty and the Woodland Alliance are going to start popping up and burning down your sawmills and your recruitment centers and your workshops. So everybody is playing their own version of the game, and for the most part focusing just on their stuff, and the board of course, but there's a lot of focus on what you're doing. So that's really unique, and that's cool. And the art style is amazing, and the game looks great, and the components are wonderful. The game is very unbalanced. I've never had anybody win that wasn't the Woodland Alliance. I take that back. I think one time the Vagabond won because just nobody was paying attention to him and he was just creeping up the victory point track, and eventually he won. But every other game the Woodland Alliance has won. It doesn't matter if I'm playing with new players, experienced players, very analytical, strategic players that do a lot of wargaming. Woodland Alliance always wins. I don't have time to get into why, but just their abilities start to stack up about halfway through the game and they just become unstoppable. There was even one game where both the Dynasty player and the Marquis de Cat player completely stormed this one location that would have sort of put the Woodland Alliance on the defensive, and over several turns could not whittle down their army, even though they were coming in with multiples higher number of warriors against the Woodland Alliance. They're just so strong defensively that once they get going, you can't stop them. So I feel like there's a lot of disbalance to the game there. I also feel like I wouldn't play this game with anything fewer than 4 players, because if you remove any one of the pieces of this puzzle, the rest of them kind of topple apart. It just doesn't work unless you have the balance of the 4 different factions, and that's not a lot of balance to begin with, like I said, because the Vagabond's kind of just doing his own thing. The Woodland Alliance has a really strong advantage once they get going, but if they get stomped early, they never get going. The Marquis de Cat starts so far ahead as far as power curve, if you can't knock them down from the beginning, they'll just grow and grow and grow. And then the Dynasty is really powerful out of the gate, but start to lose their minds after 6 or 7 turns because you just can't keep the decree functional. So it's a very hard game. It's a very unbalanced game at times. It's easy to break because if somebody starts to creep ahead, like I said with the Woodland Alliance, you just can't catch them. You can't slow them back down. There are components of the game like the dominance cards that you can play to change your win condition that I don't think should be there at all. Even though the rule says you have to have 10 victory points on the board to be able to play a dominance card, once you do, everybody just gangs up on you and immediately stops you from ever accomplishing your dominance ability. You'll never win the game. It literally says remove your victory point tracker from the board, and now the only way you can win is by meeting your dominance effect, which is controlling 3 clearings of the same color. And now that everybody knows that, you're just not going to win. They're just going to never let you do that. And you can't even just like pull it out of nowhere and go, haha, I already meet it, so I win. You play it, and then you have to be meeting that condition at the beginning of your next turn. So between the other players' turns, say you're in a 4-player game, between the 3 of them, they're going to knock at least one of those clearings away from you, and then they're never going to let you get it back. So you've basically just made the game impossible for yourself to win. I don't get why that mechanic is in there. Every time I've had a player go for that, other than the first few times where I didn't know it was coming, and unfortunately they played it and we realized it was a horrible scenario, every time I've seen a player willing to play that or about to play that, I've stopped them because it's impossible to win. Getting into the rules, like I said, you get 4 different rules, pamphlets, books, manuals here. After reading all of those thoroughly, twice, with multiple players helping, we still ended up having to Google a bunch of stuff because there are aspects to the rules that just don't make any sense. Like the fact that the term craft in this game kind of just means play. You can kind of replace the word craft with play for the cards, and it just helps make the rules make a little more sense out loud. As far as like certain components in the game, when you activate a structure, either a building or a token, to craft something, there's no way to denote that it's been activated. The rules just say you can only activate each piece once per turn. So for the cats, it's workshops, and for the Woodland Alliance, it's sympathetic clearings, and for the Eerie Dynasty, it's the roosts. It says you can only activate a component once per turn. There's no way to denote that it's been activated. You would think that these tokens maybe are clear on or are blank on one side, so you flip it over to show that it's been used. No, the same symbol is printed on both sides, and they're either square or circular, so you can't just rotate it to show that it's been used because there's no up. There's no which side is up. So there's no way to tell if you've activated other than just memorizing or remembering what you've done so far that turn, which is frustrating. So that's enough ranting. Really quickly, let's go through a proper review here, try to close things up. So starting with theme and immersion. 100% solid 2. I love everything about how immersive and how thematic this game is. It's wonderful. Solid 2 for that. Moving on to cost versus quality. This is not an insanely expensive game, and the amount of stuff that you get in the box is mind-numbing. Whether or not that's enough for you to want to buy the game just because it comes with a lot of stuff, I know in some games that doesn't matter so much. I could give you a lot of junk and that doesn't make it worth money. What comes in this box is very, very nice. And it fits in with theme and immersion, like I said. The art illustration, the design of the components is top-notch. I'll give it a solid 2 there. Moving on to ease of use. As far as manipulating the components on the board, setting the game up, moving pieces around, fitting it on a table, I'll give it a 2. It's not too big. You can play it on a 4x4. Every player's got their own little section of stuff that they need to manage, so I think that's fair. I'll give it a 2 for that. Final 2 categories. Is the game enjoyable? I don't think so. On top of the fact that, 1, this is an American-style game, which means you are directly attacking your opponents. You are moving your pieces into their territory, rolling dice, and hitting them on the head and knocking their pieces off the board. And for you to win, they must lose. On top of that, the fact that there is a complete disbalance to the factions, and at the beginning of the game you have one faction that's crushing everybody, and then partway through the game another faction starts to creep out, and then all of a sudden a third faction collapses, and then there's a 4th faction just running around doing whatever they want. there's a lot of imbalance. There's a lot of frustration that can arise out of that. That game where we threw 2 entire factions at a third and couldn't do anything to stop them, we were so close to just throwing our hands up in the air and saying, what's the point? There's nothing we can do to stop you. We sat down, even after the game was done, and did a bunch of math. And we were like, if we had attacked you for another 5 turns, nothing would have changed. So it can be very frustrating with looking up the rules constantly and having things unanswered and having to go and find examples and people's opinions on how a certain thing should be played. It's just, playing it is frustrating, trying to get good at it is frustrating, coming to the understanding that, yes, it's just unbalanced is frustrating. I'm gonna have to give it a 2 for enjoyable. Moving on to teachable. Nope. If this video was an hour long, I could not teach you this game. The rules actually come with a 2-turn playthrough demo for 4 factions. The first time we opened this box about 6 months ago, I went through that demo by myself with a couple other people watching. And after that, we quietly just looked at each other and went, no. And we put it all back in the box and put it on the shelf. And I didn't play this game for almost a year after having received it because of how complex that demo was. Then finally we broke it back out. I went through the demo again. I went through it a couple times actually. Then I read through the entire learning to play rulebook, not the advanced appendices that breaks all the rules down in great detail, but just the learning to play rulebook, and determined that this was a game that I could play. It was just going to take some getting used to. Sat down and played it with 2 or 3 different groups, a handful of times, maybe a dozen or so times over the course of trying to get a feel for it. And with each one of those groups individually, by the end of a couple of games, 2 or 3 games, we were all like, I don't like it. I don't want to play it anymore. I don't like that it does this or that or this. I don't like the imbalance of it. I don't like that everybody always seems to win with this one specific faction. The other factions don't seem to have a chance. I don't like how this rule works with that rule, or at least that's how we think it works, but we can't find a good answer online and the rulebook doesn't explain it. And it's just, I never had a group of friends, myself, think, wow, I really want to play Root again. After playing it 2 or 3 times, you do initially have that thought of like, next time I want to try this faction. I want to see how they do. I want to try this. But after you've tried that faction and you've realized, oh no, it's actually not any better with them. It's just different. Unless, of course, you play the Woodland Alliance, in which case you win. I just never had a group of friends go, wow, that's my favorite game. That's such a great game. We should play that game more. It just didn't happen. Nobody ever said, oh, we should get the expansion that adds the river folk and the lizard cult, or we should try the winter side of the map and randomize all the clearings. No one ever wanted to do that stuff. Just playing the base game eventually led everybody to the decision of, I don't like this for some reason. Like, I love how it looks. I love how unique it is, and it's such a cool concept, but I don't like playing it. And I feel the same way. So that's a 2, a 2, a 2, a 0, and a 0. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to give the 2018 Game of the Year, Root, 6, which is a shame. I really wish I didn't feel that way, but I really do. Maybe you guys will have more fun with it. I mean, if you want to give it a shot, give it a shot. At the very least, get it and play it a couple times because it just looks so nice. But if you're hard on cash, or if you really only like collecting games that you love, then this one might not work for you unless you're into this kind of thing. But anyways, this has been my review of Root. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. If you have time, go down below and click on support, support by clicking on subscribe. Leave a comment, a like, or a dislike if you want to let me know that you really just hated what I thought about this game, or me in general. It's your opinion. It's free. Short of that, I will see you guys in the next video. Have a good night.